To keep us moving along, I would like to welcome back somebody who needs no introduction, the president of 100 Brazilian Cities, to share some remarks with us, Michael Berkowitz. Thanks, everyone.
Hello again, and hello to everyone watching online and around the world. Welcome again, and thanks to Raj Shah and to the entire New York City team for all of your help and support. It's queuing up to be a really great week here. So it's barely 10:30 in the morning on the first day of the summit, and I'm already sick of my own voice. Between the Q&A, the video, and now this talk. So if you bear with me for another 20, 25 minutes where I talk a little bit about both where we've come from and where we're going, I promise to shut up and listen and learn for at least the next 3 days. And then we'll come back and wrap it up together on Thursday. So, I really, as I said, I hope this talk accomplishes 3 things. And one is I want to celebrate the work that we've done and all that we've accomplished together. And I also want to talk about how this movement is gathering momentum and why this work continues to be so resonant in cities as something I'm sure you all feel. The second thing is, with this momentum and this energy also comes a responsibility and an opportunity. And I want to talk about how we're viewing the work we have to do together going forward. Raj alluded to that, but I want to share a little bit more of that detail with you. And finally, I'm going to remind us, as if it needs reminding, but to really remind us why this continues to be so important, why this is really world-shaping, history-changing work, and the importance of cities and what we're seeing there. So let's see, is this working? Yeah. So I really want to start with one part, a very core part of this community of practice, and highlight the CROs. So there are your beautiful shining faces up there, but if you're a CRO in the audience, can you please stand up? And if you're a deputy CRO, because we know it's not just about a single individual, Joe, that's you too, please stand up. It's great. So many friends and colleagues. This is partially probably the best part of this job, is all of the partnership with so many of you. And I'm reminded that when we started 4 years ago, and I think I mentioned earlier, I started basically 4 years to the day. When we started, there were no CROs anywhere in the world. The position didn't exist. Rockefeller had contemplated this, and Swiss Re had written a white paper suggesting countries hire chief risk officers. But the CROs, as we know them, didn't exist. And in 2014, so 3 years ago to the day, there were only 4 CROs around the globe. And now, as we know, there are 79 CROs in our network alone, and actually many more in other cities, states, and national jurisdictions all over the world. In our network, they span 48 countries across 6 continents, speaking 21 different official languages. So an incredible breadth of talent and experience being brought to bear on these problems. And what's been encouraging is that the CRO is not just changing cities temporarily, but nearly all of the cities have retained the CRO after the grant funding has run out. So this is a more permanent change in the way governments and cities do business. And our goal continues to be that you wouldn't run a city without a CRO any more than you would without a chief of police, that this becomes a real permanent kind of position. And what's been encouraging, although a little bit scary for us, because governments have been our partners, is that our cities in our network have seen 34 different political transitions over the course of that 4 years. And not all the cities have been with us 4 years. And yet we've had 34 political transitions, and the CRO has survived in nearly all of them. And I'm not talking about the person, although I love you all individually. But what's more important, I think you would agree, is the office and the concept that survives. And if you go back to the original slide, the 4 original cities that had CROs, that's Christchurch, Medellin, Colombia, San Francisco, and New York, actually 2 of those CROs are no longer a part of this network. And yet they've been replaced by strong, talented, passionate, connected, competent people. And that is in some ways more important. In fact, Dan Zarilli is one. Bill Goldstein was the original New York City CRO. And of course, Patrick Odellini, who many of you know in San Francisco, was the original CRO, who's now been replaced by Brian Strong, who I haven't seen yet today, but is amazing, and really pushing that agenda forward. And so that's really what this is about. It's about changing the way cities think. And of course, it's also about partners. So if you're a platform partner, would you please stand up? Let's see you all. And a strategy partner. Are there strategy partners in the house? Please stand up. Amazing work. Aijun from De Young is both a strategy partner and a CRO, so it's a wonderful mix of talent and a vice mayor, a wonderful mix of both talents and roles. And this is important because we know that resilience building doesn't get done by municipal governments alone. It gets done by academia, the private sector, civil society, governments at different scales. All of those partners play a role in making cities more or less resilient. And this is trying to acknowledge that in a real way. And when we started this journey, we had 4 original platform partners. And today, as Raj mentioned, we have 105 partners promising 135 services representing nearly $250 million in value. And I want to just take a few minutes to talk about some that I'm excited about, although I will leave out many others that I'm also excited about. So this is just a smattering of some of the great partnership work that's happening. Impact Infrastructure and Earth Economics are now collaborating on a tool that integrates green infrastructure cost-benefit analysis into the auto case model. And I think finding ways to better capture and articulate the cost-benefit benefits of doing resilience is going to be one of the things that makes this movement sustainable across time. Amick Foster Wheeler has done amazing work in a number of our cities, including in New York, but their recent work in Paris around flood risk really helped the CRO and his team change the conversation there and was a massive benefit. And that's, as we look at what the value of platform partnerships are, they're never going to solve the really big issues, but they can be a helpful conversation starter, helpful entree for CROs to begin to think about how to leverage other work. Of course, Arcadis and Deltaris, who are here, the Dutch, who have helped our cities reimagine and think differently in more nuanced ways about how they treat water. Their work has been absolutely essential. Sandia National Labs, and I think I saw Charles here, who has helped cities, including Berkeley and New Orleans, think more in a better, slightly more progressive way about distributed energy solutions. EY, you heard from Bill Banks, which recently released a white paper to ensure that resilient thinking informs their entire infrastructure project lifecycle. And the Nature Conservancy, helping bring the private sector and the market-based solutions to ecosystem services, all have been amazing partners, and there are just so many more. So we have CROs and we have partners, but to transform cities, we really need to think about how cities approach and view risk and opportunity and what actions they identify. It's not just enough to have individuals or firms or resources, but in fact, we need to begin to change the process, and we've used the strategy process as a way of doing that. And so this time in 2015, basically when we got together as part of the Mexico City Summit, there were 3 strategies complete throughout the world. And now there are 32 strategies around the world. Boston just released their strategy, the 32nd strategy, a couple of weeks ago. And by the end of the year, there will be 41 strategies done throughout the network. So that's an amazing amount of material and effort and planning and process that's helping to shape cities and make them more livable, more sustainable, and ultimately more resilient. And of course, let's not forget about 100RC and building of the movement. And when we started, it was me and a couple of consultants. And then it was me, Brian, and Andrew, and a couple of consultants. But quickly we've grown, and currently we're 110 people across 4 regional offices with skills and expertise and cultural and linguistic competencies to begin to support you all as you do this really important work. And that's what's been really inspiring and promising. So we have entire resilience offices that have been made permanent in cities. We have strategies complete. We have a vibrant network of partners and practitioners, many of you here in this room. And for this, we should definitely all be proud. And although this is a reflection on the work, I also wanted to talk a little bit about what we see next. And I appreciate that there are many of you that are at different phases of this work in your cities. My friend Kamlesh here has released the resilience strategy. He was a part of the ACERN work. And he is at a very mature place where implementation, as Raj talked about, the actual doing of projects is the work in Surat, India. And yet there are others, Kevin Bush, for instance, who I ran into last night, who comes from HUD, was 3 days ago, Kevin, tell me, it was not long ago, was appointed the CRO of Washington, D.C., and has all of this incredible journey to go in terms of creating strategies, thinking about what the priorities are, integrating stakeholders, doing all of that community engagement. So I appreciate that we're at different places. But I also want to point to an amazing and historic opportunity that we have to shape the cities and the world that we live in. Currently, we have 32 strategies with about 1,600 initiatives identified, each of which designed in inclusive and integrated ways with the intent of creating more resilient cities. 1,600 initiatives. And yet, if you look at what the pipeline is, and this is the power of 100 resilient cities and the network, that by the 2019, we will have 100 strategies with roughly 5,000 initiatives. And that is an amazing opportunity. If we collectively, as a network, commit to implementing on these initiatives, we can absolutely change the world. And I'm just so amazed every time I think about that at the scale of the opportunity. And I think this is where we're seeing a sort of inflection point in our work. And I want to talk, Raj alluded to it, this era 3, and I want to talk about how we're beginning to envision the different phases of our work at 100RC. I want to share it with you. It's still early days. I would call it, what would I call it? Something like a final draft. But I wanted to raise it here at the beginning of this week so that we could begin to have discussions about that. Because in order for this to be successful, it's all of us. It's not 100RC. This can't be an internal tool. This needs to be something that we collectively commit to. So if you think about the eras, there was era one, which was 2013-14, when it was just a few of us. We were really trying to figure out what the value proposition is, what the value of the offerings were, how we might go about it, how we would select cities, what made a good city. And there, Dr. Judy Roden making the first announcement of the cities. And she really bears a lot of the responsibility for those early days, giving us the push and the vision and the foresight to progress. The second era is this sort of era that we're in now, let's say 2014 to 18, where we're doing the enabling environment work. We're standing up CROs, we're building champions, we're doing strategies in order to create the environments within cities in which we can actually change cities, impact people's lives, and ultimately make cities more resilient. And then there's era three, where we are proposing that we focus much more on implementation, actually executing and exploiting the enabling environments that we spent the last 4 years and $100 million creating. And so that's the opportunity that we have ahead of us. And what we've been doing internally at 100 RC is thinking about what some goals and ultimately targets, although I won't talk about them too much today, what some goals might be for this new era. And so the first goal is that together we will prioritize, design, and implement ambitious initiatives while changing city systems to drive more resilient outcomes. Really about executing on initiatives. We don't want to lose the outcomes, the systems piece, because we know city systems are really important. But this is begins to herald a focus more on implementation and what that might look like. And we're thinking about what kind of targets we might have collectively. You know that by 19, we'll have 5,000 initiatives identified. If we could perhaps implement and complete 1,000 of those by the end of this era, what would that look like? Or 500? How might that build the body of evidence and the rationale and the momentum that could begin to not just change our cities, but change the world's cities, shape markets, and do that sort of thing. The second is that we want to build a coalition of partners, investors, and innovators to realize the impact and financial returns. We're thinking more intentionally about how we crowd in money. You heard Raj throw around a stat, around 600 million of outside money has already been committed to help our cities implement. But what might a big goal look like? If you think about between development banks, investors, philanthropy, national governments, what would a good target look like? Would 10 billion crowded into the 100 cities? Would that be a worthwhile target? And really what this says is, let's think about the CROs and the strategies in particular as prospectuses. How can they serve as investment vehicles so that we can begin to leverage the resources we need in order to make the change happen? Third, we want to take collective action to both shape policy as well as markets. So think about, we've got at least half of our cities in the US thinking about distributed energy. How might their collective buying power begin to shape that market? The other is we've chosen cities in the rounds to make national level cohorts. And how might national level cohorts, the 4 cities in Mexico or in Canada or in the 10, maybe more, 12 cities in the European Union, how might they come together in order to shape policy in a way? 4 cities in China, how might they come together in order to help shape policy in the right way? And finally, and this is an interesting one, accelerate delivery of initiatives to support the most poor, vulnerable, and marginalized in cities. We have always put the poor and vulnerable at the centerpiece of what we've done, but we've had a hypothesis, a theory, that if we made cities more resilient, that would have a disproportionate impact on the poor and vulnerable, because the poor and vulnerable are disproportionately impacted by the shocks and stresses that cities face. And what this proposes, and again, this is a working draft that I share with all of you, my closest colleagues and friends in this enterprise, is that we're saying we want to be a little bit more explicit about the poor and vulnerable and what that might mean. And so this has led to debate within 100 RC, and we'll continue to refine it, but it's something that I wanted to put out there. And really, this is the ultimate impact. 500 million people living in our cities. If we do this, and we do this together, we can reduce the vulnerability and improve the well-being of those people in living in our cities. And that is ultimately what we're about. So, how do we get there? How do we get from an amazing enabling environment, an ambitious target, to actually implementation and impact? And I'm going to suggest 3 approaches to bridge this gap, and I'll go through them quickly because I know that the New York City mayor is coming, and I'm conscious of his time and all of yours. I'm going to suggest 3 approaches to begin to bridge this gap. First, inclusive design. Second, multi-stakeholder partnerships. And third, big bets on bold ideas. So let's start with inclusive design. It's really about a top-down and a bottoms-up approach that involves the community and users, those most directly impacted by the intervention, to understand what their needs and desires are, and then brings best-in-class ideas to meet those needs. This is a picture of RBD, the big U in New York City, and it looks like a shiny, big infrastructure. But the reality of the way this solution was developed was through dozens of community meetings over a year, engaging with hundreds of stakeholders. That's how we get to resilient solutions, not just top-down, and frankly, not just bottom-up either. It is, in some ways, both of these. So I'm going to, in each of these, I will give you a couple of very quick-hitting examples of what this looks like. So Boston, I said, just released their strategy. It was an incredibly inclusive process. It has the ambitious goal to end and address the impacts of structural racism in the city. And throughout this process, the CRO, Atia Martin, who I saw last night, but now I can't see her. Where are you, Atia? Is she here? In the back in the cheap seats. Atia did extensive community engagement, consulting 11,000 individuals. The one really famous example is her community engagement on a bus to really meet people where they lived and understand what their needs were. This engagement is actually leading to a number of other interventions to address climate, mobility, and so on. I was there with Joyce a couple weeks ago, and we looked at how the needs identified through this consultation might inform the development of the Fairmont Corridor, a transportation initiative with an equity focus that really connects Boston's underserved communities. So showing how community engagement and social capital can then inform transport and other mobility. We heard from Gabriella and the mobility plan of Santiago, just to highlight, because I can't get away doing a speech without highlighting bicycles, which I do, as many of you know, think is the answer to any question you want to ask about cities. And we can talk about that tonight over a drink. But the Mapocho River was this polluted river that actually community activists began to think of as a potential transportation solution and a link. And what Santiago did was connect it to a larger mobility and transportation plan. And really, I think there is even still work to go. Gabriella might agree with me to think about how this might even better serve the poor and vulnerable and underrepresented areas throughout the city. And so those are the kind of solutions that we hope your cities will develop. And finally, the Gentilly Resilience District in New Orleans, an area that was made famous by flooding during Katrina and homes underwater. Jeff Aber, the CRO, in concert with many, many other actors, have been thinking about how green infrastructure could pivot the city from thinking of itself as a funnel where it needs to get rid of water to think of itself as a sponge where it retains water on site. And what the green infrastructure does, it also helps address some of the needs of the other needs of a middle class and vulnerable neighborhood going forward. So the second pillar I wanted to suggest was the benefit of multi-stakeholder partnerships. And here I just want to do a quick plug for an event that's going to happen today at 5 back at the hotel. 2 months ago, as Raj mentioned, we convened 10 venture capitalists, 10 technologists, and 10 cities at Bellagio to think about how tech and innovation might work better in cities and why there was a barrier to getting tech and innovation in cities. Today at 5, they're going to do a readout of what happened at that conference, and they will and they'll talk about the next year's conference and the work going forward. But this is to say that these are unusual partners. Cities and tech almost never get together. They have an incredible distrust, and yet when we put them together, they had so much overlap, so much in common, so much benefit from working together. And it underscores what is possible. So first, the Melbourne urban forest strategy. There are 32 councils in Melbourne, city councils in Melbourne. Each had money for urban forestry, fire suppression, and flood control. But it was through partly the efforts of Toby Kent and the CRO and the resilience team there that the greater Melbourne area started to think about combining their budgets and looking across the metro region, and so that they could more effectively prioritize species and maintenance in ways that have better outcomes for the city. And they've been supported by a couple of our platform partners, the Nature Conservancy, Trimble, Digital Globe, and so on. But I like this example because it thinks about partnerships not just public-private, but also across governmental partnerships, which is so important. The second partnership I want to highlight is one that's emerging now. It's between IDB, Avena, and 100RC. And it's really with the purpose to align IDB funding initially in the 4 cities that are up there, which are Santiago, Chile, Buenos Aires, Quito, and Salvador in Brazil. And it's to find initiatives identified in the resilience strategies in which private sector has an implementing role. And I like this because it's a partnership with a funder, and clearly better, more integrated partnerships with funders are going to be important if we're going to really move the needle. It's a local operating foundation that knows the on-the-ground conditions and can bring that kind of expertise. And it's focusing work through the CROs and the resilience offices. And all of that is incredibly impressive and is something that we hope gets built on, not just in Latin America, but throughout the world. A third partnership I want to talk about is Accra and the World Bank. And really, Accra leveraged the World Bank's city strength process to look at the waste, health, sanitation nexus. And what that process allowed them to do was really crowd in a diverse group of stakeholders in the public and private sector, citizens groups, the larger regional Greater Accra Metropolitan Assembly, but also traditional rulers who are so important in many parts of Africa, but often are left out. And so the work and the analytics done hopefully will lead to projects that ultimately are implemented. But it's a good example of leveraging partnerships. Finally, I said we need to continue to bet on big, bold, transformative ideas. Where are the big bets? And frankly, we see this often, and for good reason, that cities start wanting to do big, bold, transformative things, but when you get ready to actually write the strategy, put it down on paper, and show it to your boss, the mayor, those big, bold bets become harder to live with, to stomach. And I think we need to continue to push ourselves and challenge ourselves to make big bets if we are really going to transform the city. So I'm going to give you 3 quick examples, and then there's a big finish, and I will, and then I'll stop. So first is Mandalay, which is committed to zero emissions by 2025. And Myanmar, and Mandalay in Myanmar, has some of the poorest air quality in the world, and the country's entering a new era of rapid development and growth. And it's this unstructured growth and the proximity of infrastructure which has led to some of these transitions. And the mayor, Mayor Lee Lewin, has committed to making Mandalay a zero-emission city by 2025, pursuing waste energy strategies and ultimately densifying some of the rapidly urbanizing areas. He's an amazingly inspirational mayor. This is an incredibly big bet. But I think there's something to be said for planting a flag and saying this is our target, this is where we're going to get to, and marching towards that goal. The second is Paris and their school system. Paris is going to publish their resilience strategy in October, and so I'm scooping them a little bit, but I'm sure Sebastian and Noemi will forgive me. It's one of the densest cities in the world with very little green space, as many of you probably know. And what they're committing to is reimagining school courtyards to make them green, cool spaces that begin to help in things like heat waves, absorb stormwater, and serve as neighborhood gathering points to promote social capital and community cohesion. They'll start with a couple of pilots, but ultimately they hope to transform 664 schools by 2040, which would represent over 500,000 square meters of concrete. So it's finding in a dense, historic city those areas where you can begin to make progress. And then finally, the one I often talk about, but it's our home city of New York, and their goal to send zero waste to the landfill by 2030. And I like this in part because it's an ambitious goal, no question about it, but also because this is not things that just the mayor controls. Carting is privately run. There are lots of citizen behavior. There are many different ways in which this needs to happen, but it represents the power of a mayor saying, this is the direction we want to go, even if I don't control all those elements to get there. And I think that's incredibly courageous and something that we in our cities need to push our mayors to do, to be comfortable with both formal and informal power to go from there. So, last few slides. Why does it matter? You all know these statistics, but let me give you just a few more images. Cities home to some of the big pressing issues. 60% of the world's refugees live in cities. Cities are on the forefront of the climate crisis because they are predominantly on coastlines and in riverbeds, that they suffer from too much water, too little, or both. We see it all the time, and this is going to continue to be exacerbated as we go forward. Cities are going to require $78 trillion of infrastructure over the next 10 years, according to the World Bank study. And here's the thing. Sometimes the infrastructure we don't build is every bit as important as the infrastructure we build. This is Caracas, Venezuela. You look at that beautiful highway that they built through. Mobility, no doubt, is a massive component of any resilient city, and yet this is a promoter of inequity and a wall by any other name, frankly. And it's not just Caracas. It's easy to pick on Caracas, but it's the South Bronx with a Cross-Bronx Expressway and many, many, many other of our cities. So as we're building $78 trillion of infrastructure, let's build it better and smarter and in a more resilient way. Inequity by any indicator is highest. This is a picture from Brazil, but it could be in many other places, highest in cities. And so when we think about how we promote equity with all of the decisions we make, that will make our cities better able to handle whatever the shocks and stresses are that they face. That will make them more resilient. And finally, because as Raj mentioned, one of the great things about working with cities is that they're innovative and they're inspirational and they're practical. And they will lead when nations don't. Cities want to take the lead on this, not for ideological reasons, but for incredibly practical, pragmatic, and innovative reasons. And that's what makes this such an amazing movement to be a part of. And so I've said it a few times, Raj has said it, But this is not hyperbole. I mean, together, because of the trends that we just identified, together we can change the world. And I hope we use this week as the launching pad to do just that. Thank you very much.